So let's move on to, I suppose, our final segment for the podcast this month, and that is our television picks, or televisual picks for, well, I suppose, what we've been watching of late. Do you mind if I dive in first? Is that okay?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
go ahead.
This particular month, I didn't want to do Vikings again. I've been watching lots of Viking stuff again. I seem to be going through a massive Viking phase. AKA my post-uni life is a Viking phase, it seems. But crucially, this month actually, I've been really getting into a TV series on Netflix again, called Forensic Files. Now, this is a collection of, and they are called collection as opposed to seasons, collections of 30 episodes each. Each episode around 20 minutes, where they walk you through a real-life crime, usually from the late 90s, early 2000s, possibly even stretching back to the 80s. And they walk you through the crime and then through the specific forensics that solved the crime. And what I'm liking about this, the reason why I'm mentioning this in this podcast, is that I've learned a heck of a lot about the potential of the human body and also the length of time between evidence being viable and evidence being lost. For example, something which I found very interesting is actually the different ways in which DNA can be not viable in a skeleton after a certain amount of time. Just from this TV show, it's very entertaining. It's I hate to say that about a crime show, but it's good because you get the crime and then you get the justice. You know, you get the commentators.
Get closure.
Exactly, you get the commentators sort of saying, "Would a peanut and a piece of string help catch this murderer?" And you're like, "I think it will," and it does. The peanut and the piece of string saves the day.
Are they using peanut as a murder weapon? If somebody with
Well, you'll have to watch. I'd hate to spoil an episode, but it's been very good for that sort of, I suppose, the forensic end, especially of osteoarchaeology. They've also had forensic anthropological reconstructions going on as well in this show, usually clay-based, but I think we're just getting into the portion of the episodes where they may start using computers as well. And so I suppose if you're curious about the practical applications of archaeology in especially criminal investigation, this is a very good show to watch. There's an osteoarchaeologist at my old university down in Durham who she actually runs a short course on osteoarchaeology for police, and these will be literally just bobbies on the beat, so that they can identify fairly quickly, for example, human bones. And then she takes them through initial identification, because you may well be called to a site where they go, "Oh, officer, we think we've got a murder," and it's not, it's chickens, you know. But being able to identify human bone, but then all the way through the implications for evidence, identification, and ultimately sometimes even capturing a murderer or something. So this stuff has very much real world applications, and so just being let into that through entertainment has been a real pleasure.
So it's not CSI then?
It's not CSI, no, and there's no bad puns. Which you think I'd be craving the puns.
In all seriousness, actually, I think that in amongst all the blockbuster telly, and I am going to be talking about telly blockbuster in a minute, there is space for the small, well-informed documentary that gives its audience nuggets of information that they wouldn't otherwise get, and maybe enrich their lives or give them a greater insight into the world they live in. And I think, given how much forensics are now involved in police investigations, and we see it even on the news, to actually have a slightly more long form way of looking at that in a non-dramatized, in a real world. To remind us, actually, this is actually about real people. Real people do the investigation. Real people are the victims. As long as it's done with care and I hate to use the word taste, but as long as it's done with respect for everybody involved, then that's. I think that kind of programming could be actually very
certainly
useful as well as absorbing.
And actually, in that sense, it's worthwhile just saying that this is the first program that we've mentioned in these podcasts whose agenda it is to actually highlight how good scientific process and methodology can have a tremendous real world impact. So usually the agenda is quite clear. At the end of the show, they'll say, this wouldn't have been possible without that scientific method or without this piece of evidence.
This is why I've always argued that Time Team was so successful. Time Team was a police procedural.
Yeah.
Right down to the lab. The scene of the
well, and then effectively the Columbo style reveal at the end, where you have talking to maybe it's some local school kids or the landowner and saying this is what happened. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
So
including that wonderful episode where they without actually saying it directly, I think it actually went down as, was it? I can't remember if it was Mick Aston's, but it was certainly one of the team's favourite episode, which was the exposure of the fraudulent site in Wales by purely using archaeological technique.
Right.
Brilliant.
Right. So yeah,
I can't remember. We should probably link to that at the bottom again. But it was it's a classic episode. It was just 50 minutes of using archaeological process to show that a site wasn't what it was purported to be.
And in that sense, again, coming back to this kind of high concept science, this idea of what is a result. Often a result is disproving another result, and actually that also has implications for what we were talking about much earlier in terms of peer review. If we're talking about good scientific practice, and I think this particular TV show, while it is incredibly entertaining and we're very much TV addicted to it, it's also just great to see science on the show, without a doubt.
But also, I think that there's a caveat to that as well. Again, I don't know if they cover that in this particular program. It's certainly been covered in other programs. If somebody gets the forensics wrong or skimps on the money or whatever, that can result in people who are innocent spending a lot of time in jail or possibly worse in certain jurisdictions.
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah, the responsibilities as well. Very good. Okay, so you said it's going to be a bit of a blockbuster type choice for you. What's your TV choice this month?
It's Genius.
Okay.
And it is Genius. Genius is the new National Geographic blockbuster biopic series about Albert Einstein.
Okay.
And the reason I've chosen it really is because it makes it turns probably the world's most famous theoretical physicist into a sort of political activist and action hero. Certainly on the strength of the first episode. I mean, to give you an example, it's high concept, high budget. The first episode was directed by the film director Ron Howard, who directed Apollo 13, amongst other things.
And does it therefore follow sort of Howard's visual style, in so much as is the, how like Beautiful Mind and all these sort of similar films, they have that kind of richness to them.
It is very rich to look at. It's beautifully shot, beautifully dressed. The money's there on the screen. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of locations, a lot of extras. Big contrast to SSGB, which was done on a BBC budget. A lot of money has been spent on this program.
Okay.
And what's interesting actually about the style, again, particularly given the subject, it is non-linear. It's flashbacks, flash forwards. It'd be interesting to see how that develops over the various episodes. But also to give you an example of how it works and what the priorities are for the filmmakers in terms of the audience. It is very pacey. It opens with a political assassination by far-right thugs in Weimar, Germany, of a Jewish minister. It then cuts to Albert Einstein having sex in his office, and that's before you've even got the full titles out the way. So it's
okay.
Follow me on this. But what is it's got a very good cast. The older Einstein's played by Geoffrey Rush.
Okay.
It's got people like Emily Watson, Robert Lindsay crops up.
Mm-hmm.
It's shot on lots of different locations, but actually, most interestingly as well, and they couldn't have known this when they made it, but the final scene of the first episode is Albert Einstein being interviewed by a US embassy official and questioned over his political affiliations. because J. Edgar Hoover is concerned that he'd be a danger to the United States if he was allowed in by US immigration. You know, you spot the current connection, don't you? It's you know, people. You might pick up a little bit of physics on the way, but it's actually a look at a very interesting life. They made no bones about it. They said that, you know, they're showing a version of Albert Einstein who isn't the man with the white whiskers and the blackboard with the equations that nobody could understand except him.
No.
So
but unless relatively interesting.
More than relatively interesting, because I think to be having to go back to our good friend Kellyanne Conway and her alternative facts, I think in the current climate, and I've attacked Nat Geo in the past for things like the original Nazi war diggers, but in this case, I think to make a theoretical physicist an action hero in the current climate with the March for Science, where the March for Science is even necessary, all credit to them for them, and I hope the series is a success. Certainly the first episode, it's very entertaining. It's a bit of a romp, but it's very entertaining. It looks great. Give it a try.
Excellent. Actually, it's I like how you brought things together. Then I was just thinking, how can we round this up? And actually, I think this whole full, maybe 1.5 hours by now podcast this month. One of the key themes here is the relationship between. Well, as ever, really, I suppose, in these watching briefs, is a relationship between especially perception and truth, but also in particular, in this instance, actually, the fact that we are in very strange times. I saw a video put out the other day by Neil deGrasse Tyson, where he talked about how he'd grown up through times of Cold War, Hot War, ethnic and social injustice, and all sorts of problems going on. But at no point could he recall a time when the veracity of science was brought into question. You know, America was always building itself, its industry, its world prowess, its nuclear weapons on the backs of geniuses. And it's fascinating that we now live
often geniuses who had emigrated for various reasons from other countries, including political refugees.
Exactly, and it is very topical. And in that sense, I suppose that. This brings me back to, I know I was on the fence when deliberately being devil's advocate when we were talking about the March for Science, but without a doubt, science shouldn't need defending, because the way that we form facts is careful, and in that sense, a fact is a fact, it's not a theory, in so many respects. But we do live in a time when science needs defending, and it's nice to see that, as you say, even in the realm of entertainment, there's something being done there, which is good. Definitely. Okay, guys, well, hopefully you've enjoyed this month's podcast. Please do comment below. Please do send us emails. Please do try not to be too abusive. And please do remember to tell us whether or not you think Andy is lovely, as we said at the beginning of the podcast. Here's to an interesting month ahead, I suppose. We're going to see a local election in this country, and then the next podcast we'll see possibly, well, not even possibly, will by definition see a whole new government. So
and we might even know who actually owns the Eleanor Cross in Northampton.
We might, and then we'll be able to put a bid in if the council owns it. It'll be fantastic. Anyway, yes, interesting times ahead and interesting podcast. Thank you so much once again, Andy. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.